Some people think disrespect starts with shouting. They're wrong. Sometimes it starts with the sound of a staple gun at 7:12 in the morning. I heard it before I even opened the front door. That sharp metallic snap cutting through the cold October air outside my house, like a rifle crack across an empty field. Then came the second sound, paper fluttering against aluminum in the wind. I already knew something was wrong. The smell of burnt coffee still lingered in my kitchen as I stepped onto the porch wearing my old Marine Corps sweatshirt and jeans stiff from sawdust. The sunrise painted the cul-de-sac in soft orange light, sprinklers ticking across perfect green lawns while little American flags swayed beside polished mailboxes like some suburban postcard. Then I saw her, Patricia Holloway, standing beside my flagpole in cream-colored heels that sank into the wet grass, one hand on her designer purse, the other pressing a bright red notice against the pole beneath my flag. My stomach tightened so hard it felt like barbed wire pulling through my ribs. $500, she said without even looking at me. Unauthorized, oversized patriotic display in violation of community aesthetic guidelines. The paper crackled in the wind between us. I looked past her shoulder at the flag above my yard. 13 folds had once rested in a soldier's hands before they placed it into mine beside a polished oak coffin under gray Virginia rain. 20 years later, it still flew every morning outside my house. Clean, lit properly, never touching the ground. Patricia finally turned toward me, lips pressed into that cold realtor smile she wore like armor. You have until sunset to remove it, Daniel. The neighborhood was waking up now. Garage doors humming open. Kids climbing into SUVs. Coffee mugs steaming behind windows where curtains shifted just enough for people to watch without being seen. Nobody said a word. That's the thing about HOA neighborhoods. Silence becomes part of the landscaping. I walked slowly toward the pole, my boots crunching against gravel scattered near the driveway. The air smelled like wet cedar and fresh-cut grass. My hand wrapped around the cold aluminum of the pole just beneath the citation notice. Patricia stepped back slightly like she thought I might explode. But Marines learn something important after enough years around war and funerals. Real pain gets quiet. I looked up at the flag moving softly against the pale morning sky. Red stripes. White stars. The same flag that covered my son Michael's coffin after Fallujah took him at 23 years old. Patricia cleared her throat impatiently. Community standards apply to everyone. I could hear the faint clink of dog tags in my memory before I even realized my hand had tightened into a fist. Not anger. Grief. There's a difference. Patricia adjusted her sunglasses and glanced toward the neighboring houses, making sure people were watching. Honestly, Daniel, this neighborhood is trying to move forward. We can't have oversized military displays lowering property appeal. For a second, the whole street went still. Even the sprinklers seemed quieter. My pulse slowed down the way it always used to before something bad happened overseas. Calm, cold, controlled. I looked her dead in the eye and finally spoke. That flag covered my son's body when they brought him home. Her smile flickered for half a heartbeat, just enough to tell me she hadn't expected that. Then it came right back. Plastic, polished, empty. She tapped the red notice with one manicured fingernail. Sunset, Mr. Mercer. Then she turned and walked away across my lawn while the flag snapped sharply overhead in the wind behind her like it had something left to say. The citation notice stayed on my kitchen table all day like a loaded weapon nobody wanted to touch. Bright red paper against 30 years of scratched oak and coffee rings. Every time the ceiling fan pushed air across the room, the corner of that notice lifted slightly with a dry little flutter that got under my skin worse than shouting ever could. Outside, the flag kept moving softly above the yard while clouds rolled low across the Colorado sky. I spent most of that afternoon in my garage because it was the only place in the house where the silence still felt honest. The smell of cedar dust and machine oil hung thick in the air, mixing with cold metal and old leather. My workshop had not changed much since Michael was alive. Same pegboard wall, same battered tool chest, same radio sitting crooked beside the window, even though it barely caught local stations anymore. His photograph rested above the bench beside a folded Marine Corps banner and the triangular walnut case that held his medals. 20 years later, I still could not walk into that garage without hearing echoes of him laughing somewhere behind me. Michael Mercer had my wife's eyes and my stubbornness. 6'2" by 19 years old, and convinced nothing in the world could stop him. He used to come out here after high school football practice smelling like sweat, grass, and cheap body spray while pretending he wanted to help me build cabinets. Truth was, the kid could barely hold a tape measure straight. But he loved being here. Said the sound of saws and sanders made the world feel simple. I still remember the last thing he ever said before boarding that bus for basic training. "Do not let this place turn into one of those fake neighborhoods, Dad." Funny thing is, Willow Creek Estates had not started that way. 10 years ago, before the oversized entry signs and golf cart patrols, this place was mostly retired couples, contractors, teachers, and veterans. People waved from driveways. Kids rode bikes after dark. Then property developers discovered the area. Big houses replaced old ranch homes one by one. Realtors started using words like luxury aesthetic and community image. That was right around the time Patricia Holloway appeared. I first met her 3 years ago when she marched onto my driveway holding a clipboard thick enough to stop a bullet. The woman smelled like expensive perfume layered over cigarette smoke and artificial vanilla. She introduced herself like she was running for governor instead of HOA president. Even back then, her smile looked rehearsed. She stared at my garage longer than she looked at me. At the old pickup truck. At the tools. At the American flag hanging beside Michael's photograph. "You know," she said back then, "buyers really love modern curb appeal in this market." Buyers. Not neighbors. Buyers. That told me everything I needed to know about her. The grandfather clock in my living room groaned out 6 slow chimes while evening settled across the neighborhood. Sunset was coming. Patricia's deadline. I walked back outside carrying the folded citation notice in one hand. The cold air smelled like chimney smoke and damp leaves. Across the street, curtains shifted again. People watching. Always watching. The flag overhead cracked sharply in the wind as I stopped beneath the pole. My fingers brushed the worn fabric near the edge while memories pushed against the inside of my chest hard enough to hurt. Arlington Cemetery. Rain hitting polished boots. White gloves folding cloth with perfect precision. A young officer placing that flag into my shaking hands while my wife cried beside me. Patricia thought she'd find decoration. Property clutter. Some oversized patriotic display, hurting resale value. But standing there beneath that flag while darkness crept across the cul-de-sac, I realized something cold and heavy settling into my gut. She had no idea what she had actually touched. And somehow, that made the whole thing worse. By the next morning, the whole neighborhood felt different. Not louder, just tighter somehow. Like the air itself had pulled taut overnight. I noticed it the second I stepped outside to grab my newspaper. Conversation stopped when I walked past. Patio chairs creaked softly as people shifted uncomfortably behind screened porches pretending not to stare. Even the usual sounds felt muted. No leaf blowers. No barking dogs. Just the low hiss of sprinklers and the distant hum of traffic rolling across the interstate 3 miles west of Willow Creek Estates. The red violation notice was still attached to my flagpole. Patricia had made sure of that. She laminated it sometime after midnight. I could tell by the glossy reflection bouncing under the morning sunlight. The woman wanted it visible. Permanent. Public. The smell of wet pavement drifted through the cul-de-sac while I stood there with my coffee slowly cooling in my hand. Then I heard tires crunching against gravel behind me. A white Lexus SUV rolled slowly past my driveway. Patricia. Her oversized sunglasses hid most of her face, but I could still see the corner of her mouth lifting slightly as she looked at the notice hanging beneath my flag. She did not wave, just kept driving at 5 miles per hour like a prison guard checking a fence line. 20 minutes later, another envelope appeared in my mailbox. Thick cream-colored paper with the HOA logo stamped across the front in dark green ink. I already knew it would smell faintly like Patricia's perfume before I even opened it. Sure enough, there it was. Vanilla and cigarettes. The letter inside listed additional violations. Improper illumination placement. Non-compliant flagpole dimensions. Excessive patriotic display visibility after quiet hours. I actually laughed when I read that last one. Quiet hours. Like patriotism had a curfew now. The metallic taste of bitterness settled heavy on my tongue while I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into the same drawer where I kept Michael's military records. By noon, Patricia escalated things again. She posted photographs of my house inside the neighborhood online forum. Close-up shots of the flag. The floodlight beneath it. My old Marine Corps sticker on the garage window. Her caption read like something from a corporate training manual. Community standards exist to preserve property values and neighborhood harmony. Harmony. Funny word coming from someone trying to shame a dead Marine's memorial in front of 300 homeowners. Comments started piling underneath within minutes. Some supported her. Most stayed neutral. But what bothered me were the ones that said nothing at all. Tiny little thumbs-up reactions from people I had helped over the years. Neighbors whose fences I repaired after storms. Whose frozen pipes I fixed during winter outages. People who waved at me every morning suddenly hiding behind silence, because speaking up against Patricia meant risking her attention turning toward them next. Around 3 that afternoon, I drove into town for lumber supplies. The hardware store smelled like fresh pine and fertilizer, same as always. Old country music crackled softly through ceiling speakers while forklifts beeped somewhere in the loading yard. Frank Delaney spotted me near the plywood stacks and gave me one of those uncomfortable half-nods men use when they do not know what to say. Frank served 2 tours in Desert Storm before opening the store 15 years ago. He glanced toward the flag decal still hanging on the back window of my truck. Saw the forum post, he muttered quietly. Hell of a thing. I shrugged. Just paper. But even saying it out loud felt dishonest. Because it was not just paper anymore. It was pressure. Public pressure. Patricia wanted humiliation more than money. She wanted me isolated enough to eventually lower the flag myself, so she could call it compliance instead of surrender. On my drive home, gray storm clouds gathered low over the foothills while cold wind rattled dried leaves across the road. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something immediately. Someone had removed the laminated violation notice from my flagpole. For one brief second, I thought maybe Patricia finally came to her senses. Then I saw where the notice had gone. Taped directly across my front door at eye level beside a fresh yellow warning sticker from the HOA compliance office. Bigger, brighter, meaner. And suddenly, for the first time since this whole thing started, anger finally pushed its way through the grief. The yellow warning sticker peeled away from my front door with a slow ripping sound that reminded me of old medical tape coming off burned skin. Sticky residue clung to the wood no matter how hard I scraped at it with my thumb. Patricia probably liked that part, leaving marks behind. The wind picked up harder as storm clouds rolled lower over Willow Creek estates, carrying the smell of rain and chimney smoke through the neighborhood. My flag snapped sharply overhead while I stood frozen on the porch staring at the notice in my hand. Final warning. Noncompliance hearing scheduled Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. Attendance mandatory. Funny how people who crave control always use words like mandatory. By Thursday night, the temperature had dropped almost 20 degrees. The clubhouse parking lot glowed under soft yellow lamps while expensive SUVs lined the curb in perfect rows like a dealership commercial. Rain tapped lightly against my truck windshield as I sat there for a minute watching silhouettes move behind the clubhouse windows. Patricia had packed the room. Of course she had. Public humiliation works better with an audience. The smell hit me the second I stepped inside. Burnt coffee, carpet cleaner, cheap cookies sitting untouched beside a folding table. The room buzzed with low conversations until people noticed me walk through the door. Then everything softened into whispers. I recognized almost every face there. Retired teachers, contractors, nurses, families I had lived beside for years. Nobody met my eyes for more than a second. At the front of the room, Patricia stood beside a projector screen wearing a cream blazer sharp enough to cut glass. Her smile widened when she saw me. "Daniel," she said warmly, like we were old friends meeting at church instead of enemies standing on opposite sides of a firing line. "Thank you for joining us." The projector hummed quietly behind her. Then my house appeared on the screen. Full color. Zoomed in from the street. My flag. My porch. My garage. Patricia clicked through photographs one by one with a small silver remote in her hand. "As many of you know," she began smoothly, "our community standards exist to maintain neighborhood harmony and future property stability." Harmony again. Always harmony when people want obedience. Another click. A close-up of the floodlight beneath my flag. Another click. Michael's Marine Corps decal on my garage window. Another click. Unfortunately, Patricia continued, certain residents have chosen emotional displays over compliance. Emotional displays. The words landed colder than I expected. Somewhere near the back of the room, somebody coughed awkwardly. Rain ticked harder against the clubhouse windows while Patricia paced slowly across the front floor like a television host presenting market statistics. This neighborhood represents growth, she said. Professional families, modern values, a clean future. Then she stopped beside the projection screen and folded her hands together. We cannot allow personal memorials tied to conflict and war imagery to dominate community appearance. For 1 second, the entire room went completely silent. Even the projector fan sounded louder. I felt heat rise slowly into my chest, but years of military funerals had already taught me something important about grief. If you survive long enough, eventually pain stops exploding outward. It settles inward instead. Heavy, dense, permanent. Patricia looked directly at me. Mr. Mercer, are you prepared tonight to remove the unauthorized display voluntarily? Her voice stayed perfectly calm, perfectly rehearsed, like she practiced this in front of a mirror before coming here. I could smell her perfume from halfway across the room now. Vanilla layered over bitterness. My boots creaked softly against the carpet as I stood up from my chair. Every eye in the room followed me. Some curious, some ashamed, some scared Patricia might turn toward them next. I looked at the projection screen behind her. The photograph of my house glowed beneath fluorescent lights while the American flag moved slightly in the captured image above the roofline. That flag, I said quietly, came home before my son did. Nobody moved. Patricia's smile tightened for half a heartbeat before returning again. Polished, controlled, empty. Then she said the one thing that changed the entire room. This association cannot operate based on grief. Somewhere near the back row, a chair scraped sharply against the floor. The chair scraped again, louder this time, followed by the heavy thump of boots crossing carpet. Everyone turned toward the back row where an older man in a denim jacket stood slowly to his feet. Walter Jennings, 72 years old, Korean War veteran. The kind of man whose face looked permanently carved by weather and hard years. Walter smelled faintly like tobacco and engine grease every time I saw him at the gas station. He pointed one thick finger toward the projection screen behind Patricia. That boy died wearing this country's flag, he said, voice rough as gravel. And you got his father up here like some criminal over a light bulb and a pole. Patricia's smile tightened again. Mr. Jennings, this meeting will remain respectful. Respectful. Walter barked a dry laugh that bounced hard off the clubhouse walls. Lady, respectful would have been leaving that man alone. The room shifted after that. You could actually feel it happening, like pressure cracking somewhere deep beneath concrete. A woman near the coffee table lowered her eyes. Somebody else quietly closed their laptop. Patricia sensed it too. Her posture stiffened slightly while she gripped the silver remote tighter in her hand. This is not about military service, she replied carefully. This is about preserving consistent community standards for everyone. Then another voice spoke up, younger this time. That is not true. Heads turned again. A teenage boy stood near the side wall holding his phone awkwardly against his chest. Thin kid, dark hoodie, nervous eyes. I recognized him after a second. Ethan Cole. Lived 3 houses down with his mother. Quiet kid who mostly kept to himself. Patricia frowned immediately. Ethan, this meeting is for homeowners. The boy swallowed hard but stayed standing. My dad served with Michael Mercer. Every sound in the room disappeared. Even the rain outside seemed farther away now. Ethan looked toward me briefly before continuing. My father died in Iraq when I was 6. Mr. Mercer paid for my baseball equipment for 3 years and never told anybody. Patricia blinked once. Just once. But the room noticed. Ethan raised his phone slightly with shaky hands. And my mom told me something else tonight. He turned the screen outward. A photograph glowed under the clubhouse lights. Young Marines standing beside a dusty Humvee somewhere overseas. One of them was Michael. Another was Ethan's father, arms slung across each other's shoulders, smiling like kids who still believed they had endless time left. That flag matters, Ethan said quietly. Maybe more than your property values. Somewhere behind me, somebody whispered, Jesus Christ. Patricia stepped forward quickly before the silence could settle too deeply. Emotional manipulation does not change HOA regulations. But now her voice sounded thinner somehow, less certain. A man near the front row suddenly stood up, then another, then another. Homeowners who had sat silent for days finally started speaking all at once. Questions about selective enforcement, Questions about HOA spending. Questions about why Patricia never found oversized Halloween decorations, but somehow targeted military memorials. The room heated fast. Coffee cups rattled. Folding chairs scraped against the floor. Patricia tried regaining control by tapping the microphone mounted beside the projector table, but nobody cared anymore. And then came the sound that changed everything. A cell phone notification. Sharp. Digital. Somebody near the back laughed softly in disbelief before turning their screen toward the person beside them. Then another phone lit up. Then another. The glow spread across the room like wildfire moving through dry grass. Patricia looked confused for the first time all night. "What exactly is going on?" she snapped. Walter Jennings grinned without humor and held up his phone. "Looks like somebody uploaded your little speech online." Patricia's face drained of color as dozens of people stared down at their screens. Somebody had clipped the exact moment she said this neighborhood could not operate based on grief. And judging by the speed people were reacting around the room, the entire town was already watching it. By midnight, Patricia Holloway's face was everywhere. I did not even realize how far the video had spread until my phone started vibrating nonstop across the kitchen counter at 1:30 in the morning. The sound echoed through the dark house like distant radar pings. Text messages. Missed calls. Notifications stacking faster than I could read them. Outside, cold rain tapped steadily against the windows while the flag above my yard whipped hard enough to rattle the pole. I sat alone at the kitchen table under the soft yellow light above the stove staring at my phone screen while thousands of strangers argued about my neighborhood online. Somebody had added captions to the clip from the meeting. Patricia standing beside that projector saying this neighborhood could not operate based on grief. The internet did the rest. Veterans groups shared it first, then local pages, then state military organizations. By 2 in the morning, people were posting photographs of their own memorial flags from across the country. Gold Star families, retired Marines, Army widows, firefighters, police officers. The comments rolled endlessly beneath the video. Some angry, some heartbroken, most simply disgusted. I should have felt satisfaction, but mostly I just felt tired. Bone deep tired. The kind that settles behind your eyes after too many funerals and too many years pretending grief gets lighter with time. The smell of black coffee filled the kitchen while I scrolled silently through messages from men I had not spoken to in 20 years. Marines from Michael's old unit. Former neighbors. One message simply read, "We remember him." Another said, "Hold the line, brother." Around sunrise, headlights swept slowly across my living room window. Then another pair. Then another. I stepped onto the porch wearing my old flannel jacket against the cold morning wind. The street outside looked different now. Not empty anymore. Trucks lined the curb. American flags mounted in trailer hitches snapped sharply in the freezing air. A man climbed out of an old Ford pickup wearing a faded navy cap and carrying a folded flag beneath his arm. Then another veteran arrived. Then another. Nobody made speeches. Nobody shouted. They just nodded quietly at me while setting small flags beside mailboxes up and down the cul-de-sac. The metallic clink of flagpole brackets echoed softly through the neighborhood as dawn broke over Willow Creek Estates. Curtains opened all along the street. Front doors creaked. Homeowners stepped outside holding coffee mugs against the cold, watching the transformation happen in real time. By 8 o'clock, nearly every third house displayed an American flag somewhere near the driveway or porch. Some brand new, some old and weathered from storage. One family hung theirs from a second-floor balcony using duct tape and fishing line because they did not own a proper bracket. It did not matter. The message was already clear. Patricia must have realized it too. Her white Lexus finally appeared near the entrance around 9:15. The SUV slowed. Almost immediately as she drove deeper into the neighborhood. Flags everywhere. Large ones. Small ones. Service flags. Memorial banners. Red, white, and blue reflected across her windshield from every direction. She stopped directly in front of my house without getting out. Even from my porch, I could see tension in the way her hands gripped the steering wheel. Then came another sound. Helicopter blades somewhere overhead. Local news traffic chopper. The deep, rhythmic thump rolled across the neighborhood, while more vehicles pulled into the subdivision carrying reporters and camera crews. Patricia stepped out of her Lexus finally, sunglasses hiding her eyes despite the cloudy sky. But the confidence was gone now. Completely gone. She looked around at the rows of flags moving in the wind, and for the first time since this whole thing started, Patricia Holloway looked exactly what she truly was beneath the expensive clothes and polished speeches. Small. Very small. Then Walter Jennings walked slowly up beside me on the porch holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one over without saying a word. Together we stood there listening to the sound of hundreds of flags snapping in the cold Colorado wind while television cameras rolled at the end of the street. The emergency HOA meeting started at 6 o'clock sharp the next evening, but by 5:30 the clubhouse parking lot was already overflowing. Pickup trucks lined both sides of the road outside Willow Creek Estates, while satellite news vans idled near the entrance with generators humming low in the cold air. Floodlights from camera crews painted the neighborhood in harsh white beams that reflected off windows and chrome bumpers like lightning trapped on the ground. The whole place smelled like wet asphalt, diesel exhaust, and burnt coffee drifting from paper cups clutched in nervous hands. I had lived in this neighborhood for 10 years and never once seen people gather like this. Veterans in old service jackets stood shoulder to shoulder beside young families carrying folded lawn chairs. Homeowners who barely waved before now talked quietly in clusters beneath rows of snapping American flags. The sound never stopped anymore. Hundreds of flags moving together in the wind created this constant rhythmic, crackling noise across the subdivision like distant sails during a storm. Walter Jennings stood beside me near the clubhouse entrance wearing his old Korean War cap, pulled low against the cold. "She is finished," he muttered quietly. But I was not so sure yet. People like Patricia Holloway did not surrender easily. The clubhouse doors finally opened at 6 exactly. Heat spilled outward, carrying the familiar smells of carpet cleaner and stale pastries. The room filled fast. Every seat taken within minutes. Reporters crowded near the back wall, balancing cameras on their shoulders, while homeowners packed every aisle. Patricia sat at the front board table beneath fluorescent lights that somehow made her look older overnight. Her cream blazer was gone. Tonight she wore dark gray. Safer. More serious. But nothing could hide the tension in her face now. Not after 24 straight hours of national backlash. The projector screen behind her remained blank this time. No photographs. No speeches about harmony. The other HOA board members looked terrified just being seated beside her. One man kept loosening his necktie every 30 seconds while another avoided eye contact with the crowd completely. Patricia tapped the microphone once. The sharp feedback squeal cut across the room instantly. "This emergency session will now come to order," she began stiffly. Boos erupted immediately from the back rows. Not screaming. Worse. Controlled anger. Heavy and disappointed. Patricia swallowed hard, but continued anyway. "The association recognizes recent public misunderstandings regarding enforcement procedures." Misunderstandings. I heard Walter laugh under his breath beside me. Then Patricia made her mistake. Again. However, she continued carefully, community regulations still exist regardless of emotional reactions online. The room exploded. Homeowners started shouting over each other, while reporters raised cameras higher, trying to capture everything at once. Folding chairs scraped violently against the floor. Somebody near the front yelled, "You called a Marines memorial an eyesore." Another voice shouted, "Answer the question about the missing HOA funds." Patricia froze. Just for a second. But that second changed everything. Missing funds. The phrase spread across the room instantly like gasoline hitting fire. A woman near the side aisle stood holding a thick folder against her chest. Rebecca Lawson. Certified public accountant. Quiet widow who rarely attended meetings before this week. Her voice stayed calm when she spoke, which somehow made it hit harder. "I reviewed the last 2 years of HOA expenditures," she announced. Papers rustled sharply as she opened the folder. "There are approximately $87,000 in undocumented beautification expenses authorized directly by Patricia Holloway." Complete silence slammed across the clubhouse. Even the reporters stopped moving. Patricia's face drained white under the fluorescent lights. Rebecca lifted several printed bank statements into the air, including payments to a landscaping company owned by Patricia's brother-in-law. The temperature in that room seemed to drop 20 degrees instantly. One of the board members leaned away from Patricia so fast his chair nearly tipped backward. Then came the final sound. A microphone clicking on near the back wall. One of the local news reporters stepped forward calmly and asked the question nobody in that room could ignore anymore. "Mrs. Holloway, would you like to explain why HOA funds were used while you were simultaneously finding a Gold Star family over a memorial flag?" Patricia opened her mouth, closed it again, and for the first time since this entire nightmare began, Patricia Holloway had absolutely nothing left to say. The silence after that reporter's question felt heavier than any shouting could have. Patricia sat frozen beneath the fluorescent lights while camera lenses pointed at her from every angle in the clubhouse. The faint buzzing from the overhead fixtures mixed with the low hum of television equipment and the restless shifting of 200 angry homeowners packed shoulder to shoulder inside the room. Outside, the wind kept driving cold rain against the windows hard enough to sound like gravel hitting glass. Patricia finally reached for the microphone with trembling fingers. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding accounting classifications," she said carefully. But nobody was listening anymore. The spell she held over Willow Creek Estates had shattered right there in front of everyone. Once people stop fearing somebody, they start remembering things. And suddenly the entire neighborhood remembered everything at once. Homeowners started standing one after another across the room. Complaints about selective fines. Complaints about intimidation. Complaints about mysterious landscaping assessments and disappearing reserve funds. A retired schoolteacher described being threatened with legal action over wind chimes. A young couple revealed they paid $3,000 in emergency compliance fees nobody could explain afterward. Every story sounded small by itself. Together they sounded like a pattern. Patricia tried interrupting several times, but her voice kept getting swallowed by the room around her. The polished confidence was completely gone now. Her makeup looked tired beneath the harsh lights. Tiny lines around her eyes deepened every time another homeowner spoke. Then one of the other HOA board members finally stood up. Charles Benton, quiet insurance salesman who spent 3 years sitting beside Patricia nodding through every meeting. His chair groaned loudly as he pushed himself upright. "I would like the record to reflect," he said slowly, "that several financial approvals were signed solely under Patricia Holloway's executive authorization." Patricia whipped toward him so fast her chair wheels squealed against the floor. "Charles, do not do this here." But he already stepped away from the board table. "No," he replied quietly. "I think this is exactly where it needs to happen." The room erupted again. Reporters surged forward while homeowners crowded closer to the front rows trying to hear every word. Somebody near the back began clapping slowly. Then more joined in. Not celebration. Relief. The sound rolled across the clubhouse like thunder. Patricia looked around desperately for support that no longer existed. Even the remaining board members avoided eye contact with her now. One woman quietly removed her HOA nameplate from the table altogether and set it face down. Rebecca Lawson stepped forward again, holding those financial documents against her chest. "I formally motion for immediate suspension pending criminal financial review," she announced clearly. Another board member seconded it immediately. Hands started rising across the room before Patricia could even respond. Nearly unanimous. The vote happened so fast it barely felt real. Just like that, Patricia Holloway was no longer HOA president. No dramatic speech. No final argument. Just paperwork, raised hands, and silence swallowing her authority whole. Patricia stared at the room around her like somebody watching their house burn from inside it. Then she slowly gathered her purse from beneath the table. The tiny metallic click of the clasp sounded strangely loud in the dead quiet that followed. She stood carefully, shoulders rigid beneath her gray jacket, and for one brief second her eyes landed on me across the room. Not anger anymore. Not arrogance either. Just disbelief. Like she still could not understand how a single flag destroyed everything she built. Nobody stopped her when she walked toward the exit. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from camera shutters clicking rapidly while reporters documented her leaving the clubhouse alone. The cold wind rushed inside when she opened the doors. Rain blew across the entrance floor while hundreds of American flags outside continued snapping sharply through the darkness beyond the parking lot. Patricia disappeared into that storm without another word. Walter Jennings leaned beside me and let out a long breath through his nose. "Told you," he muttered softly. "People can only stay quiet so long before truth starts getting expensive." I looked toward the empty board table at the front of the room where Patricia used to sit like a queen ruling her little kingdom. Now only scattered papers remained beneath the fluorescent lights, while homeowners slowly realized something strange and unfamiliar had finally returned to Willow Creek Estates. Decency. 3 weeks later, Willow Creek Estates looked like a completely different neighborhood. Not because the houses changed, not because the sidewalks suddenly got cleaner or the landscaping became perfect. It felt different because people finally started looking each other in the eye again. The fear was gone. Early Saturday morning sunlight spilled softly across the cul-de-sac while cold autumn wind moved through rows of maple trees glowing orange and gold beneath the Colorado sky. I stood in my driveway holding a fresh cup of coffee, breathing in the smell of cedar mulch and chimney smoke drifting lazily through the neighborhood. Above me, the flag moved steadily against clear blue sky, while the new floodlight cast a warm white glow across the fabric even in daylight. The old HOA violation notices were gone now. Every single one officially revoked after the interim board took over. Turns out Patricia's financial records only got uglier the deeper investigators looked. Local news stations kept covering the story for days. Misused funds, intimidation complaints, selective enforcement practices. The state attorney general's office eventually opened a formal review into the HOA accounts. Funny thing is, none of that ended up matching most people around here. What they remembered was the flag. That became the symbol everybody talked about. By the following week, flags appeared everywhere across Willow Creek Estates permanently. Not because somebody ordered homeowners to display them, because people wanted to. Veterans started gathering every Sunday morning near the clubhouse for coffee and donuts. Families brought folding chairs. Kids rode bicycles between driveways waving tiny handheld flags from the 4th of July somebody dug out of garage boxes. The whole neighborhood softened somehow. Like people remembered they were supposed to be neighbors before customers. Around noon, I heard footsteps crunching lightly against the gravel near my driveway. Ethan Cole walked up carrying a small cardboard box under one arm, while cold wind pushed strands of hair across his forehead. "My mom made these," he said awkwardly, handing me the box. Inside sat 6 homemade blueberry muffins wrapped carefully in foil. Still warm. The smell hit me immediately. Butter. Cinnamon. Fresh baked bread. Real home. "She said you probably forgot to eat again," Ethan added quietly. I laughed harder than I had in weeks. The sound surprised both of us. Then Ethan glanced up toward the flag above the porch. "My dad used to say something," he muttered. He said people only understand sacrifice after somebody reminds them freedom costs something. For a second, neither of us spoke. Wind rattled softly through the trees, while somewhere down the block, somebody hammered a new flag bracket into brick siding. The sharp metallic taps echoed across the neighborhood. Ethan eventually nodded toward the garage. "You still build cabinets?" I looked toward the open workshop door where sunlight spilled across old tools hanging neatly beside Michael's photograph. "Every day," I answered. Ethan shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets. "Think maybe you could teach me sometime?" The question hit harder than I expected. Not because of grief this time. Something else. Something warmer. Hope maybe. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, kid," I said. "I think I can do that." Ethan smiled faintly before jogging back across the street toward his house, while carrying empty coffee cups from the porch railing for me, without even being asked. I stood there alone again beneath the sound of the flag moving overhead. Same house. Same porch. Same memories. But somehow lighter now. As the sun lowered across Willow Creek Estates that evening, porch lights flickered on one by one beneath dozens of American flags stretching across the neighborhood Patricia once tried to control. I reached up and adjusted the small brass spotlight beneath my own flagpole, tightening the screw carefully with Michael's old wrench still worn smooth from his hands years ago. The metal felt cold against my palm. Familiar. Steady. A little girl riding past on a bicycle slowed near the curb and looked up toward the flag above my house. "Mr. Mercer?" she called softly. "Why do you leave it up all the time?" I watched the fabric ripple against the fading orange sky before answering. "Because some people come home wrapped in one." The little girl grew quiet for a moment, then nodded once like she understood more than children usually should. She pedaled away slowly while the evening wind carried the sound of snapping flags all through the neighborhood around us. And for the first time in a very long time, Willow Creek Estates finally sounded like home.